needs to be atoned for. Not just spoke about, but it's reparation for. When Pope Francis met with the Episcopalian bishopess, a woman in bishop's dress, and introducing to the Holy Father her girlfriend.
Oh my Lord.
It's the height of perversion. It's the height of sickness. And this is the Holy Father, the Pope, betraying Christ like this. And Europe is being punished because Russia's, well, that's another story. Russia has a plan with Our Lady of Fatima. Russia is, unlike the rest of Europe, Russia is losing the faith. Poland and Ukraine, they are, at least Poland for sure, are resisting the invasions of the Muslim hordes. Now, the Muslims are not coming in this time as they did in the 1000s, as they did in the 1600s, and the great Sobieski and the great Catholic hussars of Poland, the Crusades, with the help of the Virgin Mary, and then preached and encouraged and fired up by St. John Capistrano, a Franciscan priest who told the soldiers and the leaders, if you don't fight, you'll go straight to hell, because you betray your country, you betray God and Christ the King and Our Lady. So they fought at the gates of Vienna and drove off the Muslim invasions. Ukraine, over many hundred years, drove off the Muslim invasions. And Spain, 722 years, fought to drive out the Muslims militarily. 700 years. The United States Republic is only 200-something years old. Imagine that, 700 years. Your grandpa fought the Muslims. Your great-great-grandpa fought the Muslims. Your great-granduncles all were in the battlefield with whoever. So what's happening now is God is preparing the great punishment for Europe. And Europe is being now invaded by the Muslims. So is Canada. So is the United States. But certainly in Europe, it's more obvious. They're coming in droves. And they're not young ladies pushing baby carriages. And they're not little kids. And they're not old men crippled. They are young fighting men. And they are raping the girls. Now they're raping boys. Now they're raping whoever they can grab. They're a bunch of animals. And that's what the Quran teaches. We must never be under the liberal illusion, oh, it's just a peace-loving religion. It's total baloney. The Quran teaches torture the Catholic people. And it describes the tortures. Cut them off, hand, feet, crucify them, or cut off their heads. That's in the Quran. Pedophilia is preached in the Quran. It's perverse. The only thing to do with that book is burn it. It doesn't belong in any country, it doesn't belong in any library, except to expose its perversion. So the Muslims are moving in. Poland in 2015 had the biggest rally ever in its history. And a priest speaking to the people said, God, country, and the homeland, Poland, and honor. They said, we will not let our country receive these so-called immigrants, because they're not immigrants. And Pope Francis, again, to his despicable shame, he's pushing all this nonsense that we got to receive these migrants, these immigrants, as if they're helpless, fleeing old ladies. That's not the case. Take you back to St. Pius V. St. Pius V in 1570. The great St. Pius V. he told he and his gray hairs, he told all the young men, he relayed a message to all the naval fleets that were gathered here to be blessed before they sailed to Greece in the Battle of Lepanto, to go to battle against the Muslim invasions, because the Muslims were moving up and threatening back to come into Europe, Christendom, Catholic Europe at the time. So he rallied everyone to pray the rosary, and he told the young men, if you don't fight, I with my gray hairs will go and fight. And Pope after Pope after Pope did their duty and rallied the Christian men to fight against the Muslims. Do not let them take over in your country. And they fought bravely, and the Pope gave indulgences. There were plenary indulgences in Spain to fight the Crusades. If you went on the crusade to fight the Muslims, you received a plenary indulgence. And you had to go to confession and Mass. And St. Bernard writes to the Knights Templars and to the Knights of St. John Hospitallers and numerous other groups of knights. He writes to them and says, be lambs in the streets and be ready to defend any widows, women, children. But on the battlefield with the Muslims, be like lions. And he says, you win. If you are killed for Christ, you go straight to heaven. And if you kill them, you gain ground for Christ and drive them out of Spain and out of Jerusalem at the time, writing to the Crusades and preaching to them, St. Bernard. So look at it. The old popes who had the Catholic faith rallied all the Catholic people, drive out the crescent, drive out the Quran. And the Muslim people, that didn't mean the Muslim families and the Muslim people who were not aggressive, they could live peaceably in, so for example, in Seville. When Saint Ferdinand took back Seville, he didn't slaughter all the Muslims, but he crippled their military power, drove out the military force, and those who wanted to live under the Catholic reign peaceably, fine. They could have their commerce, their trade among themselves. But they had to submit to the reign of Christ the King and not spread their public nonsense in their Quran publicly. They couldn't publicly go on speaker and call everybody to prayer. That was forbidden, and it should be forbidden, because only the truth has rights. So think of it. St. Pius V, along with many other great popes, called the Catholic people to battle, to protect their women, their children, their homeland, and the highest thing, the honor of Christ the King. And now we got a pope who's completely going opposite. Pope Paul VI gave the banners and all the regalia that was conquered by the Catholic troops in Lepanto. He gave all that back to the Muslims in the 70s, to his shame. And then Pope Francis, he is saying, let them in the name of Christian charity, let them in. But Christian charity has also its limits when it comes to justice. And if it comes to the Quran or the Holy Gospels, Quran must go. So this Pope Francis, he is opening the gates and promoting the receiving of these Muslim hordes. And if they're faithful to the Quran, which they are, they will call the jihad, and it will be a bloody bath. And it's prophesied that France will step in blood up to its ankles from the massacres of the Muslim hordes. And they say it themselves. They're not hiding it. They say, we're coming into Germany, and they're welcomed by these liberal idiots. And they walk in, and they're just raping everybody. And so in the United States, well, we don't have, but they're moving in. They're moving in. But we're such a big country, and I don't know But certainly in Europe it's happening. And it's a punishment. Why? Because Europe has lost the Catholic faith. Europe has lost the Catholic faith. And the only weapon against the crescent moon of the Muslims is the cross. The cross of Christ crucified. And not the Protestant cross. Because Protestantism is a tool of Judaism because they all praise Israel. So Protestantism is a liberal joke. And it will never stand up to the sword and scimitars and the jihad of the Muslims. Never. The only thing that can oppose this is this. And that's why only the Catholic faith of tradition has the victory. Where the Virgin Mary, you know, on the battleships of Lepanto, this image of Our Lady Guadalupe was already on the ship. And that was only done, she appeared in 1531, 40 years before. And her image was sailing on the ships going against the Muslims. So the Virgin Mary is always, and you can even say at the foot of Our Lady Guadalupe, you got the moon, but you also got the crescent, the shape of the Muslim crescent. Because she destroys these hordes, the Quran, and all that it teaches. So Americans got to wake up and not be liberal, and not be stupid, and not be foolish, to let our country be invaded by these Quran and Allah worshippers. And Allah is Satan. That's who it is. And we got to be ready to die for that. That Allah is Satan and Christ is true God and true King. And the Quran is loaded with contradictions. For example, the Quran teaches Christ is a great prophet. He's one of the prophets. All right. So, if Christ is a prophet, and whenever he speaks solemnly, and Christ does when he says, Amen, Amen, I say to you, when he speaks solemnly, that means what he says is true. And since he's a prophet of God, everything he says is true. And Christ said very clearly, I and the Father are one. And he meant, and the Jews understood correctly, because they wanted to stone him, and he meant, I and the Father are one. One in essence, one in substance. And we have the great word from the Great Council of Nicaea in 325, consubstantialem. We sing that in the Creed. Consubstantialem Patri. Christ is consubstantial with the Father. So if he says, I and the Father are one, he means he's God. And he does the works that only God can do, raising Lazarus from the dead, 4 days dead, raising people from the dead, curing the blind, the millions of miracles. So if he says he's God and he's a great prophet and all that he says is true, then they should acknowledge him as God. But they don't. And they mock him and blaspheme him. And they hate our Lord Jesus Christ. And they hate all who adore him. So we Americans, we deserve a punishment for our country. We know, because of all the abortions, divorce, and all the perverse laws and bad education with evolution, perverting our generations of kids. We know we got a punishment coming. But we should revive and re-rally the Catholic people to stand up to these Muslims and to the liberalism, and the only weapon against it is Christ the King. That's the only weapon. And that's why, God bless Poland, they're doing what we should be doing. They declared publicly with the president, with all the military, with the leading bishops, of course they're not the Zorro, but they proclaim Christ as King of Poland. Allah has no place here. Christ the King is King of Poland. And that's what we have to declare and promote and rally, that Christ is King and he must be King of our country. But to be king of the United States means we got to fix the Constitution. The Constitution has to say, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Ghost, Jesus Christ, the true God, is the king of this nation. And no false religions will have any right to spread their heresies and errors by the press, radio, internet, or publications. That's the way it is. And what does the state do with a murderer of bodies? What does the state do when there's a murderer on the loose?
They come after him and take him out.
Why do they arrest him and imprison him? Why?
Because he had a sinful crime against him.
Yeah, he's killed your neighbor, you might be next. Right? If a murderer of bodies, says St. Thomas Aquinas, this is not me, it's St. Thomas Aquinas, if someone who kills bodies is arrested by the state and put to trial, a fair and just trial, so much worse is the murder of souls. And if I or anyone, a heretic, makes souls lose their faith and risk their eternal damnation of the loss of their souls, that's a greater crime than killing the body. That's why St. Thomas Aquinas teaches heretics should also be equally treated like murderers. And that is, locked up and put to a fair trial.
Now we'll put a fence around the whole United States.
I know, but that's the only solution, is Christ the King. And most people will convert when they see the good fruits of true Catholicism, and that the Catholic Church always promotes the good growth of any nation, the union of husband and wife in marriage, no divorce, many, many children, good education, truthful education, and not lies like evolution and all the other nonsense, and communism and socialism and Zionism and modernism. And the Catholic Church promotes the modesty and the true defense and femininity of the women, that the women dress like women in dresses, and the men act and be and dress like men. And the Catholicism, when Catholicism is truly lived, it brings such benefits to society. It brings the salvation of souls, the light of the truth is preached and given the ultimate rights. The men benefit because they are encouraged in the Catholic teaching to have private property and to run their businesses, not cheating and lying and oppressing the poor and their workers, but they are obliged to treat their workers with justice and charity.
There's no such thing as personal property anymore.
Yeah, no more personal. Well, that shows we're socialists. How many people here own their house and not are slaves to the bank?
Slave to the government.
Yeah.
Just don't pay your tax and see what happens.
Yeah, they'll take it. That's true. So we are already quite socialist. One man from a communist country came to the United States. He said, "What? You got to have a permit to build a garage on your own property?" He said, even in the communist country, they didn't have to do that. So he said, we're more socialist than the communist country you came from. So we Catholics have to get things straight. The only solution, no games with liberalism and the founding fathers, Freemasonry and separation of church and state. The only solution is the clear kingship of our Lord Jesus Christ, the clear teaching of the Catholic tradition. That's it. And with it comes such growth, such fruitfulness, and the growth of the arts, the growth of the music, the growth of all culture comes with the Catholic faith. So, one man just told me recently there were two visitors who were atheists from Chile. And they were visiting Germany and going throughout Europe. And one of the men dropped of a heart attack in the sidewalk in the street in Germany. People were walking by. They didn't even look at him. He's dying. He's got a heart attack. So his friend made sure he got 9/11 in the German form, and they were able to revive him And after a few days recovery, he slowed down, but they continued their journey, and he traveled to Poland. And same thing happened. He dropped of a heart attack in Poland in the streets, wherever it was, Krakow. And whole flocks of people came to help him. Because remember, Germany, northern Germany is Lutheran, Protestant, cold. That's what Protestantism is like. It's cold. Christ cuts off the communion of saints, cuts off the Virgin Mary, cuts off the sacraments. It's totally idiocy. But Poland, which is still very Catholic, the people have a sense of charity, and they all came to help this guy. And he was an atheist. And guess what? After that, he said, I think I'm going to become Catholic. I'm going to become Catholic. So, I guess he did. So, you know, it sounds a little harsh to liberal ears that only Christ has rights and the state must be Catholic and false religions have no right. But think about it. How cruel it is to allow false religions to spread their ideas. Protestantism accepts divorce. Protestantism accepts abortion. Protestantism accepts your right to freedom of judgment and how you want to interpret the Bible and how you want to interpret your own morals. So some Protestants are all in favor of abortion and sodomites and even assisted suicide. This is madness, and it should never be allowed in the laws or in any public domain of the state. And they teach it in the schools, where the girls can go get an abortion. Even Catholic schools. So we Catholics, American Catholics, we got to get back to the real teaching of the Holy Roman Catholic Church and cut the nonsense with liberalism and the stupidity of Vatican II and the liberalism of the Founding Fathers. They are not the solution. George Washington, he was a great man and a great soldier. I'm not taking that away. But he was a Freemason. And he wears the apron. And he addresses his brethren. You can go to Alexandria, Virginia, see the Masonic Temple. You got a statue 12 foot high of George Washington wearing his apron. Thomas Jefferson said, I have sworn eternal hostility to every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Tyranny meaning the Catholic Church, because only the Catholic Church teaches us what we must believe to save our soul. And we don't have the right to say, well, I choose 5 sacraments, but not 7. I choose Christ as man, but not as God. With the Catholic faith, you either believe it all or nothing. You accept it like a child, or you go to hell as a proud adult. That's the way it is. So we Catholics got to wake up and rediscover the real Jesus Christ, the King. He is not liberal. He's not democratic. He is the King. And our president should acknowledge him as King, consecrate our country to the Sacred Heart. The bishops, who are all cowards and jellyfish, they can't even stand up to the sodomite rule laws that were pushed a couple of years ago. They can't even stand up against abortion. They're spineless, and they become useless because of Vatican II and the new Mass. And a lot of them infiltrated the church before Vatican II. They knew it. They would implode the church from within. And a lot of these homos got in there too. So that's the only answer. Jesus Christ, King. Jesus Christ, the only Savior. Jesus Christ, the founder of his Catholic Church, and that Catholic Church of tradition, not the conciliar Church of Vatican II. So I've gone long enough. I've got to get into the confessional. So, but God bless you all, and I encourage you, read They Have Uncrowned Him. They Have Uncrowned Him by Archbishop Lefebvre. It's a great book. And we got, the men especially, you got to read it, and reread it, and reread it, and get it in the teachings of the popes, of Christ the King in our blood. Because we're raised, you know, we're raised with a lot of liberalism in our blood. We just are. And it's the modern world. Archbishop Lefebvre said, when I went to the seminary, I believed in separation of church and state. He didn't know that the Catholic Church teaching condemns it. He didn't know that until he went to the seminary. So, the true freedom for a true nation is the true religion. And I close with the quote of St. Pius X. He said, you can't have a true society and true civilization without a moral civilization. And everyone loves a moral civilization. You don't want to see your house broken into all the time. You don't want to see your car stolen. You appreciate people's honesty, right? So you can't have a true civilization without a moral civilization, says St. Pius X. But you can't have a moral civilization without the true religion. Without Christ the King and the Catholic religion. You just can't. It will not work. And so the only solution to our country and our problems in the modern world, consecrate our country to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the Sacred Heart of Jesus, get the Pope to do his job and consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and proclaim Christ as King, and really implement the laws of Christ the King, which will cause, if they're all reacting against Trump,
Oh, man.
who's not even Catholic, but promoting a little bit of sanity, these liberals will really, especially the Judeo-Masons, they will make war against any Catholic proclaiming the kingship of Christ. But too bad. Christ is King, and we got to be ready to die for that statement, and die for Him. Say a prayer and give you a blessing. In nomine Dei Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Sorrowful and Immaculate Heart of Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint John Capistrano,
Pray for us.
Benedictus Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Genus vos, Maria Sancta. Amen.